Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon. I am a guitarist and producer from Las Vegas. I primarily work with Amarionette. I am also going to be releasing my first single next month, so keep an eye out for that as well. Today, I just wanted to take you guys through one of Amarionette's songs. It's a recent song called Counterfeits. I've got the album artwork pulled up here on YouTube. It's a really, really fun track. It was mixed by none other than Stephen Hawks from Portland, Oregon at Interlace Audio. And we have the drums performed here by Joe Arrington. You probably know him from A Lot Like Birds fame. An amazing performer and really blew it out of the water on this track. So I've always really enjoyed when bands take a deep dive into their tracks, and I thought it'd be really fun to do that with a session for Counterfeits today. I have the session pulled up here in Reaper, and I'm just going to kind of just take you through what we do, how we do it, and the reasons, maybe some of the reasoning behind it, and just basically our workflow, what goes into making one of these songs. And basically, we're just going to jump right into it and start from the very top. I've got drums up here, and we're going to work our way down this project. We've got guitars next, bass, and we've got Spencer's vocals. These are muted for the time being, just because I don't produce or record any of the vocal tracks. We're going to go over these and just listen to them later because Spencer just does such a great job on his own tracking and doubling his own vocals and producing them that it's really cool to hear them just in a raw setting, unmixed. That being said, keep in mind this is all unmixed. This is raw tracks, nothing is EQ'd. If I pull up my mixer here, most of these faders are at unity gain. I have a couple things just to make them sit a little bit better for this recording, but as you can see, there's almost nothing on the drums, there's nothing on the guitars. We try to get the tones to fit and sit the way they are before sending off to mixing, so that way the mix just sounds like a really improved version of what we tracked. So without further ado, I'm just going to start up from the top here. Now, this very first track is a stereo bounce of Joe's drums that Bo Burchell, you probably know him from Seosin. He does a lot of great records. Nick and Joe went out to California to track these with him. And basically, Bo sends me back the stems, the drum stems, so that way we can track bass. That way they lock in together really tightly. So I'm just going to kind of play the drums for you raw and kind of introduce the rest of the music after a couple bars. So you can tell right there that he's playing extremely cleanly. The space that Bo has sounds really fantastic. There's no processing on any of these drums. I believe they are edited, but they're just super clean and really detailed. Moving forward, you'll notice that I have a folder here that's also labeled drums. This is a group of tracks for the program drums. These drums are very similar to what Joe played, but this is what I programmed while Nick was writing the song. So if I pull this up here, you can see the individual MIDI events. It's actually very similar. I can actually play that for you right now. As you can tell, the drum part is really similar to what Joe's playing. The snare and kick relationship is the same except for the hi-hat. The hi-hat, he's not doing the 16th note pattern. He's just doing a quarter note pattern, which is it still retains the feel, but he's put his own spin on it, which is basically the intent behind these. Nick will come in with an idea, and I'll lay down, and program a drum part really quick just to kind of get the general feel. And also, I find that having drum parts existing before you track kind of helps the other instruments lock in. So if you're trying just to record to a metronome, you don't quite get the same exact feel. And for these programmed drums, the samples come from Get Good Drums. It's modern and massive. It's the standard kit that pulls up as default. I just turn everything up to turbo just to get it to sound kind of polished right out the gate. If I were exporting these drums and doing detailed programmed drums, I would turn this setting all the way down so that way the mixing engineer has his own options that he can use. These are really great samples. Unfortunately, this is the only kit that I own as of right now, but probably get more because it just sounds so fantastic. I use these on my upcoming single. Also, if you've ever listened to Amarionette's cover of Perfect by Dance Gavin Dance, I programmed the drums using these, and you'd have no idea. They're just so realistic. They're so detailed. Really fantastic library there. All right, so we're going to move on. I'm actually going to go beyond the guitars just for a moment because the relationship between the kick and the bass is really important. The kick drum and the bass. The bass guitar and the drum relationship is probably what determines most how a song is going to feel, especially with these double hits right here. And you can see the waveforms, the bump, bump. Now, when I was editing these bass parts, you can really get detailed, and you can cut them here, for example, and slide them around, that kind of thing. Make them right on the dot there, get zoomed up, get the waveform exact. But with Ron's bass playing, sometimes you want it to happen a little bit before the beat or after the beat, that kind of thing. I try not to make things sound too robotic, but it all depends on the drum performance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the bass guitar and the drum part. Now you'll notice some of these hits, they happen just a microsecond after this beat bar here. But the attack from the kick is actually supporting the bass guitar hit. So it's actually sounds good that Ron is playing a little bit after the beat. And this is kind of a thing that R&B artists do a lot. They'll be a little bit before the beat, a little bit after the beat, or sometimes what they call right in the pocket, like right on point there. It's a really clever way to kind of play with the feel of a part, because alone this drum part could be a straight up rock beat, but with the bass part it turns a little bit more halftime because of the way Ron is performing it. So I try to preserve the inherent musicalness or the musicality in the performance while still making the performance as accurate as possible. It's always kind of this balance between the two. And it's the same thing in the chorus. Now this is a more straightforward and rocking kind of thing, so it's really important that Ron is more on the dot here. The same principle applies. You don't want to overdo it, but you also don't want a sloppy performance. So it's really just kind of threading the needle between those two extremes there. The bass parts now, kind of moving forward into the bass by itself. We always divide it up into a bass amp tone that I dial in on a Kemper profiling amp and a bass DI. Now, I usually design them to sound good together and by themselves. This particular tone, I believe, is an Ampeg SVT profile. It's a very warm kind of amp with a gritty top end. And it's also a little scooped, too. The DI is what we call a direct in. It's a signal directly from the bass without any amplification in front of it. So all you're hearing is what you would hear if you plugged the cable directly in from the bass into the computer. Actually, it's a very quiet signal since it's not amplified, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the drums off. So you can tell it lacks some of the compression and the gain from being amplified. But what this allows you to do is, if you don't maybe like the bass amp tone, or you want to blend this tone with something else, it gives you that option to do. All right, so now that we've got the rhythm section covered, I'm going to go ahead and take a dive into the guitars, because usually, as far as instrumentation goes, this is the most detailed work that I do with Nick. And you'll see here that everything is labeled by section. So we've got chorus guitars on their own tracks, we've got verse guitars on their own tracks, and we've got some effect guitars. Now, I've got 4 guitar tracks for each section here. So I'm going to go ahead and solo these and play this verse for you. So this is actually a double of 2 separate layers that harmonize with one another. So we've got that one. And we've also got this one together. It gives it a really cool effect. It makes it sound really big, but also really deep, and have kind of like almost chordal quality to it, even though it doesn't really comprise of a chord. They're just intervals of one another. There's thirds, kind of. Now what this does is it kind of creates depth to the track. You'll notice that on the lower part, there's just a reverb. And then on the upper part, there's a reverb, but there's also this kind of chirpy effect on top. And that gives it a little bit of air. It's not really noticeable inside of the mix, but it gives breath to this part. Now, you'll notice as well that I don't have any DIs. Typically, mixing engineers would demand DIs from the recording engineer. Steph is pretty content with how these sound, so we've been recording without DIs. And what it also does is makes us commit to certain sounds and production styles so that we can move on. It's really easy to get caught up in designing a tone and making things just right and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until you're blue in the face, but then you never actually get anything done and move on. This kind of forces us to say, yep, we like how that sounds. It sounds big. It sounds good. Let's go on to the next part. All right, moving into the chorus, we've got now these guitar parts, as far as a chorus goes, are a little interesting. It's not usually a riff that you would consider a chorus part, but it's got some cool effects going on it that provide some really cool audio illusions, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and solo this rhythm part here. So this is a really cool thing that I experimented with. There is a very, very subtle chorus effect and also a room reverb that we did on the Kemper for this part. It makes it sound wider than it should be without using a spatial imager. If you're into audio production, you'll know that spatial imagers, they kind of achieve what they achieve through adjusting the phase of your stereo image. This kind of accomplished the same thing, but with spatial effects and modulation effects. So it's a similar effect, but achieved without actually using an imager, which is really neat and made it sound really three-dimensional too. And then we also have the leads here. This is kind of a weird little lead part that works really well. It's a little bit more ambient, provides more space because the rhythm guitars are much drier. And here's all of them together once more, just so you can get a better idea of how they work together. So it's a really cool effect. You've got one part filling in space where the other part's lacking, but it still sounds really big and wide, even though these guitars aren't playing any chords or anything like that. We're going to go skip towards the bridge since we've already done those two parts. All right, so let's break this down in a similar fashion. You've got this rhythm part here. Now, what Nick is using here is this pedal by Eventide. I don't know the exact name or model, but essentially what it allows you to do is design harmonies, and it tracks them really well, especially with chords. Some of you may have played with a whammy pedal where you can assign a certain interval, keep the pedal cocked forward, and play these chords. But sometimes that pedal would get really warbly because the tracking couldn't keep up with multiple notes at the same time. This Eventide pedal doesn't have that problem. So Nick is able to make these really big sounding parts on one guitar with one track. He's been using it a lot lately, and it really kind of has defined his sound over the past couple of years because of his creative use of that. And we've got this cool little lead part where Nick is doing this pull-off kind of lick. And again, this also has a little bit of reverb on it. Usually these lead parts, because they aren't chord-based or they fill up less space, we can give air to the entire part by adding reverb on them. and by adding those ambient effects that kind of make it feel bigger, but without cluttering up the rhythm section. And then if we go to the end of the bridge here, we've got this really cool reversed guitar. So these guitars here fade out very simply. And what I did is I cut these up here. You can see the edit right here. I reversed them and sped them up a little bit, and we get these really cool swells as the other one decays. And then the next section hits back into the chorus. We got a good little fade out there. All right, so before I get into these vocals, I just want to disclaim that, again, I didn't do these vocals. Spencer does all of his vocals on his own. I usually don't even import them into my projects, but I happen to have them here because sometimes the band wants me to pull them in to maybe modify a couple sections or edit the instrumentation to match the vocals a little bit better. So I have them in here just as an example, and he has a lot of layers. A lot of these are actually just the same part, but just left and right. Ooh, all is over, you can find, set your limit. So he'll double a part and pan it hard left and hard right to give it a really wide effect. And there's tons of layers here. Like, to be honest, I don't even really know what's what aside from what's labeled. But these just, as raw tracks, I mean, I threw a compressor on them and EQ just to kind of make them sound a little bit, set on top of things a little bit better. But just from him singing, they just sound fantastic. So I just kind of wanted to go through them, and maybe there are some things here that you weren't able to hear in the final mix that kind of pop out here. Since everything's at unity gain, nothing's really leveled to focus on the lead vocal, so you're going to be able to hear all of the background vocals kind of in all their glory. So you can really hear all these harmonies working really well together and just making a big vocal pad. You've got these cool little down here. This is actually easier to see collapse like this. It's little stuff, little details like that that really make these songs like these fun and really dance. So you can see here at the bridge, he's got things really, really stacked. All of these harmonies, every harmony is doubled. He's got a vocal lead here, single tracked, but everything else is doubled. It's super big, super wide. yeah, that was really cool. So there's a reason why he does his own vocals. He does such a fantastic job. I mean, I don't think I honestly would have anything else to add to them. It's a lot of tracks to handle, but again, Steph does a really fantastic job at getting those all to work with one another along with the instrumentation. All right, well, that basically covers the entire song. Let me know if you liked this kind of thing. I enjoy explaining what's going on in these tracks. I'll probably do one of these for my own single when that comes out next month. If you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye out for any requests, or if you have any particular things that you want me to discuss, maybe I can go ahead and go back and cover those things. But this was just kind of a brief overview of the production inside, like kind of behind the scenes look at what we do as musicians and what leads to our decision making when we're making music for you guys. In any case, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.